Whether you dream about carving through thousands of demons, or simply want to pick up shiny items off the floor, you're going to need a really solid leveling build for your Diablo IV journey. And so far, there are very few which are as good as the Lash Sorceress. This build has it all: defenses, mobility, single target, and even AoE. Plus, unlike Virago Necromancer, I think it's a lot more of a beginner-friendly playstyle. It really isn't reliant on legendary items, and the one legendary aspect that you do want is easy to pick up from the Zenith dungeon in the Fractured Peaks, which is your first starting zone. During the early access period, I personally took a sorcerer all the way up to level 50 using this build. It should be noted, a lot of the footage is actually from a little before that when I was doing World Tier 1 and a little bit of World Tier 2 stuff to prepare. But don't worry, if you want to see World Tier 3 and post-Capstone Dungeon content, then be sure to get subscribed and leave a like while you're down there for my hybrid Lash endgame Sorceress guide, or whatever else the build ends up becoming, since I'm kind of going to play it by ear based on the sacred items I can get to drop. So what's the basic playstyle of the Lash Chain Lightning Hybrid Sorceress? First up, you have Lash, a basic shock skill, which deals damage in a cone in front of you. This is good because A, it has no cooldown, and B, it has pretty decent starting AoE. There are certainly a lot of things that outclass it later. However, in terms of the basic skills, it's honestly one of the best. Then you also have Chain Lightning, a core skill that does an absurd amount of damage because the lightning can chain not only to enemies, but it can also bounce off of you. With the enhancement modifiers, when Chain Lightning bounces off of you, the next hit deals 10% increased damage. This means the ideal rotation for a boss is bounce the Chain Lightning off of yourself, boss yourself, boss yourself. Two legendary aspects to look out for are Chain Lightning bounces, and each time Chain Lightning bounces off of you, gain 6 mana. Chain Lightning has a mana cost of 35, so with a few bounces off of yourself, you're almost refunding the entire mana cost. It should be noted that a lot of bosses summon adds though, which is a little bit unfortunate since it actually reduces our single target DPS. Defensively, a couple things that we're using are Ice Armor. This forms a barrier around you for 6 seconds, absorbing a percentage of your life, which is effectively infinite. My Ice Armor falls off because its duration ends, and it really doesn't end up ever dropping from damage because while Ice Armor is active, 5% of my damage is added to the barrier, and I do quite a bit of damage. Then there's also Frost Nova, which freezes enemies solid. On elites, this is going to help with their break bar. On normal enemies, it means they just don't move and probably won't ever move again since you can easily finish them off before they unfreeze. This also makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, massively increasing your burst damage. And speaking of, our burst skill is Unstable Currents, an ultimate skill that, whenever you cast a shock skill for 10 seconds, it uses a random core, conjuration, or mastery skill. Unstable Currents is quite nice, and honestly feels really good despite the fairly long cooldown. Last but not least, for Sorceress, we've got enchantments, and there's quite a few that I ended up using on my leveling journey. At low levels, I found the Ice Shards enchantment to be really nice. That way, whenever I pressed Frost Nova, the entire pack would be deleted almost instantaneously. Unfortunately, because I was only using a rank 1 Ice Shards, the damage didn't scale that well. So ultimately, I did end up replacing it with a Fireball enchant. I also picked up the Fire Bolt enchant. Direct damage from skills applies an additional burn over 8 seconds, allowing you to deal a significant amount of extra damage. Though it should be noted, if you have a high crit rate, Ball Lightning's Mastery for Lucky Hit, critical strikes have a 25% chance to spawn a static Ball Lightning, is also a great way to add damage, while also negating the fairly significant 50 mana cost. Alternatively, because your Lash stuns, you could go with the Charged Bolts enchantment. When you stun an enemy, there's a 40% chance to release 3 charged bolts from them. And if none of those really appeal to you, there's always the good old Chain Lightning Mastery. Chain Lightning forms automatically after spending 100 mana. Because Chain Lightning chaining off of you ends up refunding some of a mana cost, this triggers a lot more than you'd expect. Personally, what I would advise, at low levels, grab Ice Shards. As your level goes up, grab Fireball and Firebolt. Then for single target boss fights, switch over to Chain Lightning, dropping the Fireball enchantment. The others, while somewhat handy occasionally, weren't really my cup of tea, though that could be because I just didn't have good enough gear to make them work while leveling. And speaking of, let's take a slightly more detailed look at the skills and what ranks you put into them. So first up here, I have 5 out of 5 in Lash. Early on, you won't have ranks to max this out, but you should pick up 1 point, then get Enhanced Arc Lash and either Flickering or Glinting. Glinting requires you to be hitting an enemy for a long time, which doesn't exactly make it ideal at low levels. Instead, I'd go Flickering for the move speed and swap to Glinting later. Don't worry, you'll double back later to grab Firebolt, but I wouldn't do that until around level 30 when you pick up your second enchantment slot. Next up, Chain Lightning, get that immediately, and pick up Enhanced plus Greater Chain Lightning. This is for the mechanical combo that I mentioned earlier. At low levels, that's about all you'll have, though after you pick up your first enchantment slot at level 15, Ice Shards is quite good like I mentioned before. If you're using the Fireball enchantment, you will want at least 1 rank in here, though if you have ranks from gear, you can also drop this like I just did right now. Personally, I also kind of like Charged Bolts, not because it's something I'm going to be casting or have on my bar, but when it triggers from Unstable Current, you do get the enhanced effect of reducing enemy damage by 20% for 3 seconds, which is really great for face tanking bosses. In terms of defensive skills, you're going to be investing quite a few points, since this build doesn't take any conjuration skills. So you'll want Ice Armor, Teleport, and Frost Nova. Be sure to take their enhancements as you continue progressing down the tree. We also don't take any mastery skills, since we don't really need them. Though, if you're going to use the Triggered Ball Lightning and you have enough crit, definitely invest into this and grab the enhancements. Then, once you've unlocked Unstable Currents, you absolutely want the ultimate skill, since it's a majority of your burst DPS, and you'll continue to place points until you can allocate Veer's Mastery. Now, what about those additional points? Where should you be allocating them? Well, first off, I'd start with Glass Cannon. This is 18% more damage. Yes, you take 9% more, but you've absolutely got the shields to tank that. After that, I'd go with Align the Elements because you're not getting hit that often on bosses. And you can even grab Protection for a few more defenses if you feel it's necessary. Then, once you get the Firebolt enchantment, go for Inner Flames. Your Pyromancy skills deal 3% increased damage, while healthy isn't really that important. What you want is Devouring Blaze. You deal 30% increased critical strike damage against burning enemies. If you're immobilized, this bonus is increased to 75%. Keep in mind, this is a multiplicative 30%, so it scales off of all of your other crit damage multipliers. It'll also scale with your crit chance and isn't quite as important early, which is why we don't pick it up until around level 30. Coming down here, Coursing Currents into Electrocution is great for extra defenses, and Fiery Surge, killing a burning enemy, every enemy will be burning, is a great way to get extra mana, and extra mana is damage. This helps make up for the loss of DPS when a boss summons adds. And so that's a quick overview of the skills, with roughly what you'll get going up to level 50. Right now I'm level 44 and just finishing up a couple more things in the world before I do my capstone dungeon and head into the endgame. Where I'd be looking to put my last points is into things like Teleport and a few of the extra utility skills. Maybe grab another rank or 2 in Protection. But skills alone don't a character make. So what items am I wearing and why? First off, for my weapons, I just go with whatever offers me the highest DPS. A socket is a plus, since the life on kill makes you feel almost invulnerable while clearing large packs, but it's far from required. As a note, it can also get somewhat costly to constantly be upgrading your weapon and reclaiming things from sockets, so only do it if you think you're going to stick with it for a little bit. Next up, on my rares, I'm not too worried about my boots, move speed's good, and that's kind of just a personal preference. For my pants, any legendary aspect is pretty good. Taking direct damage, resetting the cooldown of a defensive skill is honestly insane. I'd look out for this if you can find it. If you can't, don't worry about it at all. On your gloves, try to get ranks of Chain Lightning. 2 is ideal, but 1 is fine, especially here where the rank of Fireball isn't wasted, it saves me a skill point, and the crit chance is also pretty good. On chest, lucky hit chances increase while you have Barrier. I'll have Barrier a lot of the time, so this is free lucky hit chance, which is I'm not really invested into lucky hit at the moment, doesn't do all that much. I wouldn't worry about this and just wear whatever the green number tells you. For your helmet, green number, whatever it tells you. For amulet, again, green number is probably totally fine, though I do quite like something that has a legendary aspect on it, such as this, where every time I Arc Lash, I increase the damage of my next Chain Lightning. So this leads to a little bit of a rotation of Arc Lash, Chain Lightning, Arc Lash, Chain Lightning. For rings, this legendary aspect, each time Chain Lightning bounces off of you, is very important. You can do the Zenith dungeon in the Fractured Peaks to get it, or you can find one as a drop, restoring up to 6 mana instead of a 4 from the crafted version. If you get a ring like this, then you kinda just don't replace it until far later into the endgame. And for my other ring, I'm using the Mother's Embrace, which, if a core skill hits 5 or more enemies, 25% of resource cost is refunded. This is a good way to get a little bit of extra value when the boss summons adds. It is far from required though. And so that's an overview of the gear I have now. In terms of things that I'm going to look out for in the future, I do absolutely want to keep something like this. Also a legendary aspect like this. Anything that enhances basic or core skills is also good. Anything that enhances shock skills is good. And if you can get +2 chains to chain lightning on your weapon, that is insanely powerful. I would consider that to be your next highest priority in terms of offensive legendary aspects. But overall, don't worry too much about that while leveling. Just go with what you get, and it should be fine. So now that I've taken some time to talk about the build, what about the leveling experience itself? Since we use skills that are available from a very low level, your actual gameplay won't really change too much. And I advise that you stay on World Tier 1 until you're ready to do your capstone dungeon and jump straight to World Tier 3. For example, in the Fractured Peaks, doing quests around Kilvishad, I mostly relied on Arc Lash to kill enemies, and I just threw out occasional chain lightnings. This was the point where Ice Nova really felt like it came in clutch, and I absolutely wanted to rely on it. As I progressed the story and moved to Skosh Glen, I found myself easily able to ignore most enemy moves by putting up Ice Barrier. Combine this with teleporting around, and the build felt significantly tanky, even against key boss fights. At this point, Ice Nova was still doing quite well, but it definitely started to fall off here. And this is the point where I honestly probably should have switched my enchantment, but at the time I'd been streaming and kind of just going with things and didn't pay attention to my build, so I didn't end up actually switching the enchantment until Act 4, which was definitely a mistake. Next up, as I moved on to the Dry Steppes and Act 3, this is where you should be getting close to or unlocking your ultimate skill, and also where you have significant ranks in both Arc Lash and Chain Lightning. Overall, the build feels like it's fully online at this point and won't really be changing much in future acts. This is also the point where you should start to pay attention to legendary aspects, and not just look at green number good on your items. Do make sure that you get any ranks you can to both Arc Lash and Chain Lightning. Then, as you progress, moving up to the Capstone Dungeon, getting a little bit of life, resistances, and life on kill all feel pretty good. Again, legendary aspects where you can find them. But overall, my experience has been that the build came together nicely and just kind of worked. Personally, I don't really like to think about my builds while leveling. I could optimize it and switch things up from time to time, but honestly, I'd rather it just does everything that it needs to and I don't have to think about it. When it comes to leveling in Diablo IV, personally, I think Sorceress is one of the smoothest. She's got really good quality of life, persistent damage options if you want to spec into Hydra, something that I didn't do because I never got the double Hydra aspect, but something that I absolutely would have if I found the aspect throughout my journey. And she's also just a really strong feels-good class. You can CC enemies, teleport away, put up an ice barrier, get your mana back, or just use a basic skill that does a surprising amount of damage. There are, of course, several other ways to level. If you want, you can use Flame Wall. You can go more of an Arc Lash trigger variation, or you can go with cold skills. But personally, I've found that the Arc Lash hybrid, bouncing between Arc Lash and Chain Lightning, really does feel the best, and it gives you the most options both for when you have mana and when you're out of mana, when your buffs are up and when they're down. My only concern is that this experience has colored my perception of Diablo IV, because leveling felt very easy. I almost never died, and I rarely felt like I was even in any danger. The few deaths I did have were to blatant stupidity. Oh, there's a big circle in the ground that you definitely shouldn't stand in. Yeah, I'll be fine. Oh, I was okay. All right, I'll stand in 2 of them. Okay, I'll let the enemies shotgun me while standing in 4 of them. Oh, I died. Wonder how that happened. And so now I'm curious. What has your experience been with Diablo 4 so far? Did you play it in the beta? And did you find it easy or difficult? Or maybe you're just excited to get started, and if so, are you going to be playing Sorcerer? Let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments below. And of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. If you're looking for something else to watch, maybe check out my thoughts on Diablo 4 as a whole, my PoE Player's Guide to D4, my guide to picking the best class for you, or my upcoming tips and tricks video, which you should absolutely get subscribed for. All of those, including the tips and tricks once it comes out, will be up in the card and down in the description below, or you can always go with the recommendation that's on screen right now. With that said, thanks for watching, stay safe on your journey through Sanctuary, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.